Hey, I'm really glad you're here. This channel is all about sharing things I find interesting, useful, or just fun to talk about. If that sounds like your vibe, feel free to subscribe and hang out with me.
She looked me over the way people do when they've already decided. Slowly, shoes to collar, with that slight tilt of the head that says she was cataloging rather than seeing. Then she smiled. Wide enough to show she wasn't worried about being caught at it, and said loud enough for the three women standing nearby to hear. Griffin always says you have the patience of a saint. Teaching teenagers all day. I can't imagine coming home to that kind of quiet after all this. She gestured at the room behind her, the vaulted atrium, the candlelit tables, the gala in full swing, and let the implication hang there like smoke. Though I suppose someone has to. I smiled back. Just enough. It's funny you mention that, I said, keeping my voice conversational. I was just thinking about how much it takes to do truly original work. The kind that starts from a single person's idea. I paused. Does the awards committee know the Riverside drawings have a history before the firm? The champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips. She recovered fast. She was very good at that. But something behind her eyes had already shifted. A window slamming shut. Whatever she said next was light and deflecting, but her voice had lost its footing by half a step. She excused herself within 30 seconds. I got a glass of sparkling water and watched her navigate across the ballroom to the far wall, where she stood alone for the first time all evening. For the rest of the night, she kept to the periphery. She left before dessert without saying goodbye to anyone. I watched her collect her coat from the attendant near the entrance and push through the door into the cold. Let me back up 5 months. Griffin is an architect. He's been with Baxter Pemberton Design for 11 years, which in a mid-sized firm is practically a geological era. And he's the kind of person who cares about his work the way some people care about their faith. Quietly, consistently, in ways he doesn't often explain. We've been together 14 years, married for 9. I know his patterns the way you know a house you've lived in for a long time. Which drawer sticks, where the cold comes in, what certain silences mean. For years, when he worked late, I knew what kind of late it was. There was deadline late, which meant he'd come home around 10 with ink on his wrist, and eat whatever was in the refrigerator without tasting it. And there was creative problem late, which meant he'd come in closer to midnight. Still turning something over, not quite back yet. I'd learned to read the difference the way you learn a second language. Not by studying it, just by being around it long enough. What started happening last September was neither of those. He'd come home at irregular hours, no pattern I could map, not energized, not exhausted, somewhere in between, which was worse. He showered immediately when he got in, which he'd never done before. He kept his phone face down on the counter. He stopped talking about work the way he always had, just running through the day out loud over dinner to decompress. That habit was gone. The silences started to have texture. I noticed the Riverside project changing in how he talked about it too. Earlier in the year, when it was still in the design phase, he'd bring it up constantly. The Riverside Cultural Center was the largest public commission the firm had landed in years. A building ordinary people would actually walk through. Not just a corporate lobby. And he cared about it in a way I recognized. He'd sketched ideas in his personal journal at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings. Pages of them, the green leather journal he'd had since graduate school. I'd seen him do it for months. Then in September, he stopped. If I asked about Riverside, he'd say things like, Astrid's really driving the presentation side. Or the committee wants a slightly different direction. Vague, sideways, none of it landing anywhere solid. He stopped bringing the journal out. He came home one Thursday in October and didn't eat dinner. Just sat on the back porch with a glass of water. And his phone, not doing anything with either of them. I'm not the kind of person who assumes the worst immediately. I wanted to take things at face value. But I'd been married to this man for 9 years, and I knew what it looked like when he was carrying something alone. I started paying attention the way I hadn't before. The credit card statements showed charges I didn't recognize. A parking garage in the financial district on Tuesday evenings, a coffee shop I'd never been to, twice in 1 week. Not hotels. Not the category of charge I was afraid of finding. but they were at hours he hadn't explained. In a pattern that felt deliberate. I called Zelda on a Tuesday morning, while Griffin was at the office. Zelda had been 2 years ahead of me in college, the kind of person who was organized in a way that seemed almost aggressive. Color-coded notes, a system for everything. Never once late. She'd become a private investigator, which had surprised me until I thought about it. And then it hadn't at all. We'd kept in loose touch the way you do with people you genuinely like, but don't see often enough. "Do you think he's cheating?" she asked me, not unkindly, just directly. "I think something's wrong," I said. "I don't know what." A pause. "Those are different problems." "I know." She agreed to look into it. 2 weeks, maybe 3. She called me 12 days later. I was in the middle of grading still life drawings, sitting at my desk after school. I stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and listened. Griffin wasn't having an affair. Zelda had done the surveillance herself 4 separate evenings. Every meeting with Astrid took place in public, a coffee shop, a restaurant near the river, once a hotel lobby bar. Always visible, always lasting 1 to 2 hours. No contact beyond a handshake at the end of one longer meeting. No hotel rooms, not that. "But here's what I did find," she said, "and this part is solid. Public records, city planning office, some of it from the firm's own award submissions. Nothing obtained illegally." I waited. The Riverside Cultural Center commendation lists Astrid as lead designer with Griffin credited as senior collaborator, but the core design, the courtyard fenestration, the angled reading room, the way the entrance recedes from the street, those elements appear in photographs of Griffin's personal sketchbook, dated 8 months before the project brief was issued. The design language is identical. He originated the concept. The submitted documentation obscures that. I was standing in a school hallway, holding a stack of charcoal drawings, and I felt the floor shift under me. "Why is he letting her take the credit?" I asked. "That's the second part," Zelda said. "It's more complicated." Before Griffin joined Baxter Pemberton, he spent 4 years at Meridian Architecture. When he left, he signed a standard non-compete and NDA. What he hadn't quite left behind was a set of parametric rendering techniques. A modeling methodology he'd helped develop at Meridian. Tools that weren't publicly available, and that his departure agreement had covered. He'd used them on Riverside, probably without thinking twice. The way you carry working habits from one job to the next, without accounting for what belongs to whom. Astrid knew. Zelda wasn't certain how. Whether she'd recognized the methodology, or whether Griffin had told her at some point, trusting her more than he should have. But Astrid knew, and she had made sure Griffin understood what that knowledge was worth. If he pushed back on the credit attribution, if he told anyone that the concept had been his, she would surface the Meridian issue. It would cost him his standing at Baxter Pemberton. Possibly more, depending on how Meridian wanted to pursue it. If he stayed quiet and let her keep the commendation, she would keep what she knew to herself. They had been meeting to manage the terms of that arrangement. I stood in the hallway for a long time after we hung up. There's a particular kind of cold that comes with understanding something you can't take back. It's not the same as anger, though anger was there. It's more like clarity, which sounds useful and sometimes isn't. Sometimes it just means you can see exactly how far the damage goes. I'd been worried about the wrong thing entirely. This was stranger than what I'd feared. My husband wasn't in love with someone else. He was cornered, and he had decided to stay cornered alone, rather than tell me. And he had been doing it for months. While I lay awake, cataloging the distance between us and wondering what I'd done, I spent a week deciding what to do with what I knew. The gala had already been on the calendar. The firm's annual awards dinner. The formal ceremony where the Riverside commendation would be presented. I knew Astrid would be there. I knew Morton Baxter would be there. The firm's managing partner, who had founded it 22 years ago, and still attended every event that mattered. I knew what the evening was supposed to look like from Astrid's side of the room. I let it get there. I just made sure I knew what I was carrying when I walked in. Zelda had shared what she'd found. Photographs of the sketchbook pages with their dates legible, the award submission documents with the design elements visible in parallel. I hadn't forwarded them to anyone. I hadn't called the managing partner. I hadn't confronted Griffin. I'd sat with all of it for a week and thought about where and when, and in front of whom. I wore the dark green dress I've had since before we moved to the house we live in now. I've always liked it, because something about it makes me feel like I've already thought things through. The atrium of the Harwick Hotel was beautiful in the way that event spaces always are. Rented elegance, borrowed light. About 200 people, architects, clients, city planning contacts, the spouses of all of the above. I knew a handful of them. I'd been to enough of these evenings to know how they moved. Griffin was near the bar when I arrived, mid-conversation with 2 junior associates. He looked up and found me the way he always does, and then something moved across his face that I'd seen for months now. Relief weighted down by something heavier than relief. He came over and kissed my cheek. "You look wonderful," he said. "Thank you," I said, "so do you." He held my gaze 1 beat longer than usual, as if he was checking something. Astrid found me 40 minutes in near the appetizer station. She was in something architecturally considered. All clean angles. Clearly expensive. She had the self-possession of someone who had been the most capable person in most rooms for long enough that it had stopped feeling like effort. She made the comment about the patience of saints, about teaching teenagers, about quiet. And I smiled and asked my question. The champagne flute paused, her eyes closed down. She excused herself in under a minute. I found a spot near the edge of the room and watched the evening from there. Dinner was served at long assigned tables. Griffin and I were placed near the center, within easy conversation of Morton Baxter and his wife. A woman named Pruitt, who taught landscape architecture at the university, and was considerably more interesting than the seating arrangement implied. Astrid was 1 table over, visible if I turned my head. She ate almost nothing. She checked her phone and set it face down, repeatedly, across the entire main course. Twice she looked at Griffin. He was watching his plate, cutting his food without eating it. Morton Baxter asked me about the school year during the fish course. We talked about public arts funding for a while. He cared about it more than I'd expected. Had specific opinions about municipal grant structures. I listened and responded, and the whole time I could feel the weight of what I was holding. What I hadn't yet done anything with, except ask 1 careful question to 1 particular person. The awards portion began after the entree, 3 recognitions. Riverside was last. When Astrid walked to the small stage, her composure was almost complete. Almost. She spoke about collaborative vision and the importance of public-facing architecture, and thanked the committee and the firm. Griffin's name was mentioned as senior collaborator. He didn't react. He just looked at the table in front of him, very still. I watched the whole thing. I excused myself quietly during the applause, the way you do when you're slipping out to the restroom. I moved toward the corridor that ran along the outside of the ballroom. Griffin followed me out within 2 minutes. I heard his footsteps on the carpet before I saw him. "What did you say to her?" he asked, low controlled. "I asked a question," I said. "What question?" "Whether the awards committee knew the Riverside drawings. Had a history before the firm." He stopped walking. "How?" he started, and then stopped. "I know about the sketchbook," I said. "I know about the attribution. And I know about Meridian." He was very still. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "How long have you been handling this alone?" Something happened in his face then. 8 months of tightness coming to the surface all at once, like pressure finding a seam. He looked older than he had at the start of the evening. "Since August," he said. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't know how." "That's different from not knowing how," I said. "You didn't try." I said it without anger, just accurately. We stood in the corridor, with the muffled sounds of the ballroom behind us. He looked at the floor, then at me. "What happens now?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "You go to Morton Baxter and you tell him everything. The Riverside attribution. The Meridian methodology. All of it, yourself, before he hears it from another direction. You accept whatever comes from that." "I could lose the position," he said. "I could lose more than the position." "I know. And if I don't do it?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I don't know what we're doing. He understood. We went back in separately. I returned to my seat and listened to Morton Baxter finish a story about a building project in the 80s. His wife laughed at the right moment. I smiled and poured myself another glass of water. Astrid left before dessert. She crossed the room, collected her coat and walked out the front entrance without saying goodbye to a single person. The door swung shut behind her. Griffin came back to the table a few minutes after I did. He didn't speak for the rest of the evening, but he stayed. He didn't follow her out, didn't make excuses, didn't check his phone. That felt like a decision. We drove home mostly without talking. The radio played something slow. I didn't turn it off. In the house I made tea and sat at the kitchen table for a long time while Griffin went upstairs. The green dress was folded over the back of a chair. I thought about the last 5 months. The dinners, where he'd been present only in body. The nights I'd lain awake trying to account for the shape of his absence. The questions I'd asked myself, and then talked myself out of. The sketches in the journal. The way he'd stopped taking it out on Saturday mornings. I thought about Astrid's face in the half-second, before she'd reassembled herself. One sentence, said pleasantly, at the right moment within earshot of the right person. That was all it had taken. Not a confrontation, not an accusation. Just a question that meant I already knew the answer. Griffin spoke to Morton Baxter on Monday morning. He told me that evening standing in the kitchen while I was cooking, in the straightforward way he has with things that are hardest to say. Morton had been, in Griffin's words, more measured than I had any right to expect. The Meridian issue would go to legal review. The Riverside attribution would be corrected in the firm's documentation and the award record. Griffin's position was under review. He didn't know yet what that would mean. And Astrid? I asked. She submitted her resignation the same day, he said. I don't know what she was told. I don't know what she'd already anticipated. I nodded and turned back to the stove. That was 3 months ago. The review is still in process. We see a therapist on Thursday evenings. Not because the marriage is ending, but because something in it needs to be rebuilt, and neither of us is naive enough to think that happens without effort. Some sessions are easier than others. Last week the therapist asked Griffin why he hadn't told me when it first started. And he sat with the question for a long time. He said he thought if he told me, it would become real. I understood that more than I wanted to. Zelda called a few weeks after the gala to check in. I told her what had come of it. You played it right, she said. I asked one question, I said. You asked it in the right room, in front of the right person, at exactly the right moment, she said. That's not a small thing, that's almost the whole thing. I've been sitting with that. Thinking about what it means to carry something carefully. To learn the weight of it. Understand its edges. Choose when and where, and in front of whom you finally set it down. I'd spent months making myself smaller, more patient, more accommodating, more careful not to take up too much space in a marriage that had stopped making room for me anyway. Asking questions I already knew the answers to. Setting the answers aside. I'm not doing that anymore. Whether the firm review lands well or badly. Whether Griffin and I rebuild what we had, or build something different in its place. Something more honest, which might end up being better, or might just end up being truer. Those things are still being decided. But I know what I'm walking toward now. And I know that the woman who sat on the floor of a Target store in October, holding a decorative pillow and trying to make sense of credit card statements, is not who walked into that gala. The green dress is hanging in the closet. It did its job, I might wear it again,